Good evening. On behalf of KPCC and Southern California Public Radio, welcome to the Crawford Family Forum. KPCC would like to thank LA Universal Preschool for their support of our education programming. Tonight's discussion features filmmaker M. Night Shyamalan on his ideas for closing the education gap. And now your host for this evening, independent writer and producer and former Marketplace Money host, Tess Viglin.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much to our audience here at the KPCC Crawford Family Forum, as well as to those of you who are joining us as we stream live at kpcc.org. As we mentioned earlier, we hope that you can tweet along with us, Facebook along with us. Feel free to give us some feedback as we're going along here. This will be a discussion, I think, a lively one. And it's a pleasure to be here on stage with Night. We've been friends for a long time. We go all the way back to October. We did something similar to this at Chicago Ideas Week, and I think it was a little chillier than it is here today. When I was asked to do that interview back in October in Chicago, I remember thinking, what is this guy doing? He makes movies. Why is he talking about education reform? Why did he write a book about this subject? First he sees dead people, and now he wants to fix the education system, and I'm not sure which one is more difficult. But if you've read the book, you know that at the very least, Night is sincere in his desire to find solutions to what seems to be an intractable problem in America. At best, I think he's armed with a lot of money that went toward a lot of research to study this issue, and how can you not give him the benefit of the doubt that this was a noble effort when there was really no other reason for him to do it, other than it interested him and he decided to look into it. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time going through Night's biography. If you're aware of movie culture over the last 2 decades, you know who this guy is. But I'll mention Unbreakable, Signs, The Village, The Happening, and more. You may not know that he wrote the screenplay for Stuart Little. And of course, the cultural touchstone that gave us a new national catchphrase that I already used, I see dead people, in a movie whose ending nobody amazingly shared with their friends before they had seen it, The Sixth Sense. So tonight we're going to talk about education. That is our topic. And Night spent several years researching this book. We are going to hear his thoughts on the problem, why it's so intractable, and some of the solutions that he has come up with. And later on, we will hear from the head of one of the schools that Night cites in the back of the book, Ana Ponce, the CEO of Camino Nuevo Charter Academy here in Los Angeles. So, M. Night Shyamalan, thanks for being with us.
Thank you
here
for
in
having
Pasadena. Yes or no
Thank
question?
you.
Yes or no question for you. Is this an effort to make sure that what goes on your gravestone is not I see dead people, but I got schooled?
No, as most things that are good and meaningful, it didn't have any agenda to it. It just came from something inside. But I'm going to correct both the announcer that did a little intro and yourself. These aren't my ideas. So you know how the announcer said, and his ideas for closing the achievement gap. I have no ideas for closing the achievement gap.
Okay, we're
Zero.
done.
I have no reason to tell you any ideas for closing the achievement gap. That's not what this was. This was intentionally, as the title says, it's just about me learning what others have proven in the data or what the data supports. And so, I'm a tourist, and so I really don't have my lack of currency in this subject matter is the point. I knew nothing, but I just spent 4 years gathering the data and saying, guys, did you know this? Because I didn't know this. And also, when I came into it, I had so many biases that had to be true, and most of them weren't. And found it fascinating. So, and I guess that's where, because the one thing I have a little personal thing against is celebrities going out and saying, do this, save the whatever, do that. Or if it's not coming from something other than their celebrity, you know what I mean? When it's truly coming from a source of knowledge or something, it's different. But that's just my own pet peeve. So I would hate to see myself in that, there's so many brilliant people in the book, and it's really just me being a tourist saying, look at what he said, she said, and look at what they've done and the incredible work they've done. And did you know this?
All right, well, let's start with how and why you
Sure.
did
Yeah.
choose this particular topic. The subtitle of the book, as we can see here, is The Unlikely Story of How a Moonlighting Movie Maker Learned the 5 Keys to Closing America's Education Gap. And to do that, to get started here, let's look at a clip from a movie that caused you to start asking questions.
I don't know if any of you guys have heard about this article in the New York Times. Well, apparently, honeybees are just disappearing all over the country. Tens of millions of them. All right, let's hear some theories about why this might be happening. Nobody? You're not interested in what happened to the bees? Excuse all the teachers? The administration makes us teach with a foot of snow on the ground. What is this?
There appears to be an event happening.
Twist. All right, so this is from The Happening. It's your 2008 movie starring Mark Wahlberg. And so a couple of years before that comes out, you are in Philadelphia scouting locations. And we just saw that there were several scenes there in classrooms in a school. What happened?
I guess just a little bit of a preamble before that is that we have a foundation, our family foundation, and like most foundations, it goes through the kind of the evolution of writing checks to causes that you think are worthy, and a sense of not being able to connect with the results or feeling something. It just feels like you're writing a check. And then the evolution of a foundation where you spend a lot of money and accomplish very little. And we went through that whole process and, wrote a $1 million check for low-income housing, and at the end of the day, that produced nothing. And really heartbreaking stories like that. And ultimately, we came to the realization, and that it's more than money. It's your time, your effort, your own human capital that the world needs, and not necessarily writing checks. And so it started kind of that way, and then thinking about education in Philadelphia in particular. And it was still an idea, hadn't been galvanized yet, but I went to go do the location scout for The Happening, and we went to some high schools. And the first high school we went to that we got off the van was this incredibly beautiful high school, and it's actually the one we chose. And it was just an incredible environment. You walked in, and the kids, they saw me when they came running out of their classrooms, and they were like, you're making a movie, or can I be in your movie? Can I die in your movie? And everybody was just really, really into it. And the teachers came out, and it was so buoyant, and every classroom was beautiful, and the facilities were amazing. And
And they were like, of course he's here at our school.
Yes, and they were just they recognized just right away that I was there and what that meant was right there in the edge of their tongues. Then we got in the van to go to see another school, maybe like a 4-minute drive in Philadelphia, and we get out, and this school was the complete opposite. It was it's the gray stone mats. You walk in, very low light. There was a metal detector with a guard there that made you get all your metal out. He was yelling and this and that. You go through the metal detector. This literally happened. So I walk in the metal detector, and then this kid comes up to me, and he looks at me, and he kind of looks at me, kind of recognizes me, and then decides that's not possible and keeps walking. And to show me the classrooms in that school, there's literally bars on the classrooms. I'm not talking figuratively. It's literally, there's prison bars on every classroom. They have to find the janitor. They open it up, and they show me each classroom. One whole floor of this school had been shut down because of rampant drug use, sex, all that. So they just said, we can't keep track of this many floors, so just shove everybody down. And the theater was being redone at the time because someone had set fire to it. And I just was, kind of devastated by being there. There was a sense of hopelessness in there. And then when we were driving, I saw that same kid outside the window when we left, and he just with his friends looking in the trunk of a car, and they definitely weren't doing their homework. It was it was very upsetting to me. I was very, very upset and angry that in my home city that this could be there, and the difference between the two. And having come from a place where in that first school, anything was possible, right? That was the point of the two experiences. Anything's possible. Anybody can walk in. Any opportunity is available to them. And then in this school, no opportunity is available to them, even if it's standing right in front of them, right? They just don't even see the possibilities. So the question started getting, then I go, that's it. Let's just find out what's the difference in these 4 minutes away schools in Philadelphia. So, it began me saying, let's just sit down with people around the country and ask the question, the people that are, experts in the field that I'd heard about. And luckily they would take my calls and I'd go visit them.
What was the question?
The question?
Yeah, what was the question that you were
that I asked
asking?
them? What works? And what do you know works? So, I come from a medical family. My uncles, aunts, my parents, everybody's a doctor. And so it's an evidence-based field. Is smoking bad for you? You're not going to have 100 opinions in this room. There's all one opinion. It's evidence-based. So I was thinking that's what was going to come back at me. And then I could just, formulate what works and try to champion those things, that it would be simple. And I went to talk to these experts. These are the chancellors of the cities. These are serious people everywhere. And they had their thoughts, but it became very apparent that it was some based on experience, some based on research, and a lot based on opinion. And nobody's lists were the same, which was really confusing to me.
Did you have a sense before you really started delving into this of what you might find? Did you have a bias in terms of what you thought the major problems were within the educational system?
I did, and I think that I was feeling that from the beginning, and that's why I was so adamant at the beginning of this. I don't want to be another opinion in this. I already think there should be no opinions in this. Nobody has an opinion about heart surgery. It's heart surgery, and we do best practices in heart surgery. If I'm going to go, you show me best practices. I don't want to hear your opinion about where you should cut. and tell me about the guy in Norway who found a new way to do it between the ribs. That's what I want to hear. What ended up happening was I was so confused because, again, all I wanted to do was know. That's all I wanted to do. And one of the things I talk about in the book is one of the first things we did was we got all these prominent people from Philadelphia together, all the real kind of movers and shakers, and we had a think tank dinner because they had heard that I was interested in this and that I wanted to work on, education. I wanted to learn. So they got everyone together, and there were people that owned charter schools. There was all the people in education with it, things like that. Major players in kind of on this side of the fence. And same thing again. I said, what works? And they said, well, classroom size, absolutely, and this and this. And then they just started, and I just was taking notes. I was like, wow, this is really early on in the game. And I was like, you guys have evidence for this, right? You guys can back this up. Charter schools are the answer, and this is the answer, and that's the answer, and a lot of villains, of course. There was a lot of, it was very heated, very, very heated. Instantaneously, it was like super heated, and I was like, everybody bring it down a notch. We're going to take out the opinion of this, if you can, from me. And I said, what you just said is factually based. So so one particular lady was saying, charter schools. I know we're not supposed to talk about them, but we're going to talk about them. And said, charter schools is the answer. And I said, absolutely. Very convincing, very emotional. And I said, you have the data to back that up. And I said, that's all I want to see. Yes, absolutely. I said, great. So tomorrow in my office, send it to me. I'm your poster child for charter schools. Next morning comes, and I get a brochure for the charter school. And I was like, well, that's not what we said. And then,
did it have a lot of numbers in it?
You know what? It didn't have that many numbers in it. And ultimately, I just said to the foundation, that we should spend our resources and hire researchers and just get all the information on a table, since I can't seem to find this table. And all I want is the table. I want to go to the doctors and know what's been proven. Just tell me the facts. And so the first 2 years, this was 2 years of gathering the data, and by that we mean peer-reviewed studies and really setting a high bar for what we were gathering, and it turned out to be basically a sense of a meta study, so in each particular field, whether it was classroom size, for example, that we're not looking for one thing, we're looking for 150 of them, and that qualify for this and put it on, what did they collectively say, those kind of things. It took a long time, and even deciding to not use certain studies from other countries, when we decided it was only the United States we were going to look at. That was one. We'll get to that later about why, but it was a critical point of definition.
So you have all of this material in front of you on the kitchen table or wherever you are. And what surprised me most in reading your book was how very little people within the research community had shared and talked about all these findings, that there was no real overarching effort to quantify all this, to make, to essentially put together what you were looking for. That there just had not been this coordinated effort to get all of that material together. Did that surprise you?
It does, and to this day, if I had to write another book, it would be about why I had to write this frickin' book. I don't understand it.
For an issue that is so charged.
I don't get, this is 101, right? We all know together collectively, and we look at it. It's 101. Why in this particular subject, and by the way, I have a theory, and it's completely opinion, but we'll get to that at the end of it as we talk further. But it's at the crux of why we're where we are. Are we invested in this? Are we invested in this education gap for these kids who happen to be 98% African American and Hispanic? Are we invested in it for some reason? Is it supposed to be there in our minds? And so we can't find the answer even if it's right. It's right there in front of us. So 2 years comes, right? And to defend it a little bit, sometimes it's just a way of looking at information that gives you, but you have to look at the information assuming that there's an answer there. And that maybe is the only thing that I brought to the table was my belief that if I concentrate very, very hard, I can move this bottle of water. Because I think there's 1% chance that telekinesis is real and I can do this.
I want to see that movie.
I can just concentrate as hard as I can. And that ridiculous kind of thinking about the world, perhaps that's the only thing I offer to the equation. And so for 2 years, there was a mess. When you looked at the table, it was a mess. This many said this was, for a particular thing was pro and this was con. It was just a mess. It just didn't seem like anything. And your instinct at that moment is to just become another opinion and cherry pick, get confirmation bias, and pull the things that I want out of the pile to confirm what I originally was thinking to begin with. And that's would have made me another one of these people in this situation, and that's not what we wanted to do. So it kind of froze there for that moment in time with the table and all this data on the table. And then we went to dinner with our friends.
All right, let's get to that in a minute. I do want to follow up on something you just said, which is it would have been really easy to just cherry pick.
Yes.
What was your bias at that point? What did you believe was the biggest problem in the system?
You know what? I don't know if I had a feeling like that, but I had my answers. One was classroom size, for sure, right? That's just intuitive. I want my kids to be taught by a teacher who can pay attention to my kids, so that's just intuitive.
And you have 3 daughters.
3 daughters. I'm an artist, so let the great teachers do their thing. Let everybody do their thing, right? That was another one. Spirit of individuality and originality. This is that's where I come from. I live off, and no one's gonna tell me how to make a movie, right? So that got so
sure.
I had those kind of biases going in. I'm trying to remember another one that was super strong. Education, hire better.
Hire better teachers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And these are all before, right? And then lightly, we'll educate the hell out of our teachers. They all should have PhDs, kind of thing. So those kind of ideas. Now, every single thing I said, by the way, is wrong.
All right. Well, let's get to this dinner that you mentioned.
Yeah.
So you have all of this stuff that's kind of bubbling up
Yes.
around your curiosity about this subject, but you can't quite make sense of what you've got. So you go to dinner with some doctors.
Yeah. So
And this is where the light bulb goes off.
Yeah, and it's just like in that way, it's just like a movie. Like you get stuck, you get stuck in a moment. You kind of want the movie to tell you what it is. It reveals itself. And this was, I guess, that moment for the writing of the book, or the understanding of how to look at things. And it was, so our friends are really brilliant doctors. And at the time, Kevin was teaching the residents at the University of Penn Hospital. And so he was in charge of them, the hotshot residents from the country. As you imagine, the residents that get into the University of Penn residency program are the best of the best. And they think they know everything. And so his first job is to tell them the real. And he was, we weren't talking about education. He was just talking about his job. I was just like, dude, tell me what your job's like, because I really admire this guy. And I go to him for advice, and I was like, God, everybody must listen to you, so tell me what you do. And he said on the first day, he tells his residents, he goes, everybody shut up. This is the first thing you need to know, that if you tell your patients for the rest of your life, you tell your patients, they walk in your office, that if they sleep 8 hours a day, they eat a balanced diet, they exercise 3 times a week, they do not smoke, and they pay some attention to their mental health at work, at home, are they stressed, are they not? Pay attention to it like it's a real thing. If you do those 5 things, your chances of getting all diseases drop to an incredible level, beats every pill ever invented. And the residents didn't believe it. He said, it's documented. Every single thing I'm saying is true. But then he said this, but if you don't do one of those things, the chances of getting sick starts buoying back to the norm, because the body is a system. And then I went, this is like a moment from House, when he gets the answer. And I was like, that's it. This is a system. That's why the first thing I did, by the way, when I wanted to get an education, I said, take me to the city where the education system's working. Of course, there is none. And I went, my gosh, it's working like a system. So I remembered that. And then when he said this at the dinner table, I go, my God, maybe all systems work this way. That it's a multi-hit thing that has to be done together to treat it like a system. So if you don't, you're going to get a lot of false negatives. You're going to get a lot of confused answers in the research. So we went back then and we said, let's look at all the data where they did simultaneously multiple things and always got a positive answer. Is there such things in the research where you did these things and it always did this? Again, took forever to do this with the researchers and breaking it down and them making it sense to me, because I don't know anything about effect size of standard deviation divided by this, that, and the other thing, all that stuff. They had all the stat guys breaking it down, and I'm like, speak English. And I said, I can't write this if I don't understand it. And so they kept telling me, and lo and behold, it took about another year and some, these piles emerged. And they were clean and clear. A lot of it was just understanding categorization. And a lot of times problems are just that. You're not thinking about it in the right category. It's right there, the answer, but you're thinking about it incorrectly. We looked, and these categories became really clean and clear, and everything fit nicely into everything. And I was like, wow, this is what the research says. If you do this, it will close the gap. So we went then, and then we checked our answers. We went to the schools around the country, and I flew to all the schools in the different cities that I could go to, and to see if they were doing these things, or some of them, or any of them, and they were doing these things. It was amazing. It was an amazing experience to see, it was like a blind test, right? Just looking at the data and not referencing any schools, and then going and seeing what the schools are doing, and they were doing this. It was an amazing thing. At various levels, and having various levels of success in closing the gap, how fast they were closing the gap, as they're doing all of them hard, we were closing the gap dramatically. It was a fascinating thing. There's lots of things to get into in terms of what those things were and what that meant, but it was a very exciting, that's how we got to where we were.
So what you then tried to recreate was this notion of the 5 things that you have to do to be healthy, right?
Yeah.
To be a healthy school system.
Yes.
You have to have all 5. You cannot have 3 out of 5. You cannot have 4 out of 5. You have to have all 5.
Well, what happens, for example, like in the health model, right? If you're not doing one of those, if you're doing 4 of them but you smoke, you're taxing your system, right? So you may be healthy, you may not, but your chances are buoying back up then that you're going to get sick in these different ways. So you're taxing the system by not doing one of these things. You keep taxing the problem, and the system is not healthy. The body wants to be healthy. Just give it a chance, and these kids can learn at an incredibly high rate, probably higher than we can even imagine. And they are there to learn, and they can if you do these things.
All right, well, let's talk about those 5 things.
Please.
Let's talk about them individually, very briefly. First, school size and class size. And you seem to be running against every ounce of conventional wisdom by saying that smaller class size is not the answer, but school size is. Aren't there a bunch of studies that show that smaller class size equals better education? Doesn't that just make sense? You already mentioned that as a father.
Yeah. So let's talk about this for a second. So this takes some nuance, the classroom size argument. So what we're talking about is closing the education gap, right? That's what we're talking about only. And so what we're talking about, you guys probably all know this, so forgive me, but what we're talking about is like low-income inner cities where the predominantly we're talking about low-income kids, right? So 85% or higher are qualifying for free lunches, where the families are making very, very little. Those inner city schools with those families, how those kids achieve versus their white suburban counterparts. And that is a gap. There's a gap there, right?
You call it education apartheid.
Yes, and we will get there, but that's because the one group is all non-white and one group is white. And that gap's what we're talking about. How to close that gap. How to make my daughter's school better, I have no idea. No idea. Probably you reduce class size or whatever. I don't know. I don't know how to make, those schools. This was solely, all this research is about closing that gap. Classroom size is not one of the things used to triage to close the gap because it has so many concomitant issues with it. Cost, the taxing it puts on everything else. It's just not one of the things that's done. It does have a positive effect in smaller classes in the early years, but the positive gain is nowhere near necessary for the burden that it puts on the whole system. The big study that, by the way, when I looked at all the research, there were 2 false negatives and 1 false. There was the classroom studies from the Tennessee study, STAR study. I think it was 1984, which sent the whole country going that way. A classroom study, because that's the one study that, and has never been duplicated, that had incredibly strong results for small classroom size. And so everybody just went that way, and it's so intuitive. It's easy to get votes behind it. Politicians, run on it, and it became a huge thing. And it's just confusing because, ironically, by making that our number one thing, you're actually doubly taxing the system. So you can't even close the gap. It's much harder to close the gap because you're stressing everything. So it's a fascinating mess that we got into from that thing. There was a false.
But why is it not a solution when it seems so logical?
It does. Here's the thing. A good teacher. So here's the thing. A great teacher dwarfs the positive effect of a classroom, lowering your classroom number. And you have to lower that classroom number so much that it's just not realistic. It's so expensive. So let's say you reduced 4 classes. So let's say it's so significant. Like, I'll tell you this. If you had a great teacher and they had 30 kids in their class, and you had an average teacher, and they had 14 kids in their class, which class should you put your kid in? It's a no-brainer, 31. You don't blink. It's 31. That's why it's not part of the process here to close the achievement gap, which is a triage kind of, we're at war kind of situation. It's just not part of the gap. That creates more teachers you need and more. It's going in the reverse direction. It's not, the schools that are closing the gap don't use that as part of their tools. So it was a fascinating one. It really was, because it went against what I felt was needed. And I kind of allude to it as the equivalent of having a pet in the health model. As you may not know, or you may know, having a pet actually extends your life expectancy. So it's a positive thing. But I wouldn't necessarily say you have to have a pet to be healthy. So
I think you do.
There you go, see?
All right, well, let's get then to the notion of a smaller school. We've talked about a smaller class size.
So the smaller school thing, as you know, probably from the Gates Foundation thing where they supported it and they kind of backed off a little bit from it. It's a fascinating thing. That would be the equivalent of not smoking. Not smoking doesn't make you healthy. it gives you the opportunity to make the others work. So in that kind of, metaphor kind of way, so small schools are there as a catalyst for the other ones that we're going to talk about here. The effects of the other ones can only be done in a small school setting. The things that we're going to talk about in the other tenets can't be done when you double the size of the school. It just can't be done, because what you find ultimately, that a lot of the things that we're talking about, it's about intensity. It's about how intense you're doing the thing, how intense. We'll go through the different pieces, but and you can't do it that intensely in that size of a school. And by small school, we're talking about 550 or less.
And one of the real issues there is then how big a school a principal is presiding over. So one of your tenets is that principals are not doing the right job, that they're doing things that they shouldn't have to concentrate on, that the role of the principal needs to be different within that smaller school, and the only way for them to be able to do that is a smaller school.
Well, let's phrase it this way. So one of the tenets that Tess is referring to is the balance of leadership. That's what I called it in the book. And what that means is that a principal, you find in the schools that are closing the gap, he or she is spending 80% of their time or more on teaching teachers. Observing, helping, supporting, in every way. So that makes sense. A coach needs to coach the players. If the coach wasn't coaching the players, how's the players, no matter how talented the players are, how's this going to work? And what you find in these urban low-income schools, that less than 20% of the time of the principal is spent teaching teachers. Sometimes it's like 4%. It's like they're not, so each of the teachers are an island unto themselves. If they succeed, they're all by themselves, right? And in these successful schools, they're literally, it's incredible to watch. All the classroom doors are open. They're coming in and out of the classroom, and they'll say, Mr. Stevenson, in the middle of a class, Ms. Stevenson, you didn't call on Sally over there. I think Sally has a question. Thank you, Mrs. blah, blah, blah. Thank you. Sally, what's the thing? They don't take it pejoratively. This is just not the culture that we're used to, which is if a teacher sees a principal, it's bad news. That's just not the culture. This is your coach. And saying and conveying best practices and constantly getting you to a better place and giving you feedback and observation and all these things. They're coaching the teachers, and you see it. I mean, it's a fundamental switch that they need support, to do their best work. If I'm a teacher, I need to be told. I don't want to, I studied martial arts for example, right? And I didn't have to invent martial arts. It's thousands of years old. I'm not going to learn the physics of the body, where the elbow bends and all this stuff, and how to topple a guy who's 250 pounds. I don't want to figure that out. Someone teach me the system, and I will individualize it for me, but I need to be taught a system. So it's like that it's a craft, that it's an art form, and all these things. It's a fascinating thing. So part of it was that these teachers are doing 80% of the work. They also create an incredibly consistent and loud culture. And that's part of the principles that we've seen, and this is not a small thing. This isn't like school spirit. This is the thing. Like, for example, I was talking with Brett Pizer, who's the head of the Uncommon Schools in New Jersey, which are amazing, and he says these kids are being told something outside of the classroom, so we need to shout something louder. And when I say this is at the core of, now I'm going to get into my opinion for a second. Okay? Opinion. This is about the fact that this country was built on the sin of slavery, in my opinion. This is what this is. This is the end conversation of that conversation. It's in our genetics. This conflict. And
can you explain that?
yeah, so for example, these kids they walk out that door, and here's the thing. I'm going to say one of your colleagues, I don't know if you call him a colleague, but Chris Matthews, on the show with Chris Matthews, and
sure.
Chris goes, so I'm on the show with Chris Matthews, and Chris goes, "So, Knight, our principals and teachers suck, isn't that right?" And that's how we started the interview, and I was like, That's actually not what the data says. That's actually not what the data says. In fact, after spending so much time with it, and I was just talking at the White House actually recently about this, saying the problem is this. We think the problem is within the schools. That's not what the research says. The problem is outside the school doors. And if you just take this example for a thing, so a kid in a low-income inner-city school in June, let's just say, is at this level, and their white suburban counterpart is at the exact same level at the end of their second grade year. When they return in September, the inner-city low-income kid is 3 months behind where he was or she was in June. Did you hear that? 3 months behind where they were in June. The white suburban kid is 1 month ahead of where they were in June. They are 4 months apart. They don't even look like the same student. Now, just imagine if I'm a slightly below average teacher and I'm getting this kid 3 months behind and I'm supposed to teach third grade. I've got no shot. Over here, I've got a shot to keep him on grade level. He's 1 month ahead. I've got a shot. And when I found out all of this stuff, you know, that gap we're talking about, that summer gap, accounts for 2/3 of the entire gap by the time they get to college, by the time they finish high school. 2/3 of it is all about the summer months. It's not a problem of the schools. The inner city low-income kids are facing a challenge that we're not admitting. This country is telling them something in every way you can tell someone it, whispering it, their family's expectations, the neighborhoods, the stores, the images, whatever it is, the lack of everything. This is not for you. This is not your country. And I say that, this is my opinion. It's there. And what happens is the schools that are screaming a different message and a consistent message are the ones that can close the gap with these kids and actually create a gap the other way.
Can you talk about what's missing in those summers? I mean, what is it? Because all the kids are out of school.
Yeah.
Are you talking about camp? Are you talking about the conversations that are going on around the dinner tables? What are you talking about?
Everything, right? Everything. You know, the studies of, like, you know, a low-income family speaks like 3 million less words every year. There's everything. It's in expectations. It's in did you notice that? Did you see that? The conversations, the experiences. It's in the real situation. Our kids have many teachers, not just the ones called teachers. We're all teachers teaching it. And in that other situation, there is no teachers when they come outside. And the book makes a real point, hopefully, of saying this is completely unfair. What we're saying, can you close this gap just in the school, from the time you go into the doors to the time they come out? Can you close this without asking poverty to heal itself, without asking this thing, what we're talking about, to change? If that was a constant, can you still close the gap? That's the real question. And the answer, luckily and happily, is yes. It takes an incredible amount of work, but it's a very empowering thing. That the answer is yes.
So this is where you're saying that one of the keys is to keep kids in school longer.
So another tenet. So you have the balance of leadership. The other one is extended time, more hours in every way you can. I just pointed out this summer, we support, our foundation supports an amazing kid, this Harvard grad named Alejandro Gac-Artigas, and he has a summer program where he intensely teaches reading to the same kids. And it's intense, and it's 5 weeks. In those 5 weeks, his inner city kids, these same kids, get 3 months ahead. So you're hearing me correctly. They're 6 months ahead of their kids, their equivalent kids in their inner city schools, and they're 2 months ahead of the white suburban kids. So they're creating a gap the other way in 5 weeks. It's an amazing thing. And so we found that the data supports in every direction you can keep them in the school environment, extend the day, extend the school year, go into early childhood. Every single direction helps you close this gap.
And you're just operating on an assumption that the money would come for this if it became a priority. Because, I mean, the whole notion of keeping kids in school longer, whether it's for a longer day during the usual school year or keeping them in for the summer, I mean, hours have been cut back over the decades. Yeah. So the idea that that's going to happen,
All I'm saying, so when I go to watch, when I'm talking to anybody and they say, what does the data say? I said, when you make a decision like this, you're going against everything we know. And when you make a decision, you're going with everything you know. You have the support of the research behind you. So when you're cutting school hours for inner city low-income kids, you're going the wrong direction. You're 100% going the wrong direction. That's what they say. So you can find the answer there, but that's not the answer. At the end of the book, I talk about what each thing may cost. I'm hypothesizing with economists who help me do that. And then I said, I suggest a way that you could pay for all of it. And so we could talk about that at the end. So the two things so far we've talked about, three things we've talked about are the small schools, the way the balance of leadership looks, and the extended hours in every direction. By the way, just to touch on a smaller point in the extended hours, there's a whole thing about, early childhood that there's a confusion about that. I remember I was listening to Bill Maher recently, and he was mentioning it in a pejorative sense. And so here's the thing. That was a false negative. The Head Start program thing. That's what he keeps referring to and what others refer to as, early childhood doesn't work, early childhood doesn't work. That was an isolated thing that was wildly inconsistent, the results from that study. Those early childhood programs were not consistent. Most of them didn't even take attendance. That wasn't the one. Since then, there's so much data. It's very consistent and true. Early childhood is a huge head start for these kids. It gets you to the starting gate at or above their peers, and here's the thing, this is the naysayers will say, well, its effects diminish, and that is true. But it'll diminish after 3 years. It starts to diminish back when you put them back into the system. But all of these things are meant to help the system unburden itself. So a below average teacher like myself cannot hurt the system, that I can keep giving you guys at grade level. Your kids will come in and you'll learn a year with me. If your kids have an advantage coming in early childhood, there's going to be variables. Some teachers are great, some are not. Like all the normal things, the normal ebb and flow. This has to be a system that works for almost every teacher. That's what it makes it scalable. So that's part of the unburdening process by doing the early childhood.
All right. Well, let's talk about one of perhaps the harsher elements of all this. And to quote Chris Matthews, it's all the teachers, right? They're the problem.
Well done. I was right back there.
Thank you very much. Let's see. I can also do it.
My producer's going to be
cackle.
calling you.
No, so one of your tenets is you fire the bad teachers, period.
All right, so let's be real careful about that. So let's not, so here's the thing. Everyone fixates on that as the be-all, end-all. That is not the be-all. The research says that is part of it. That is not the thing. If there's no silver bullet, but that certainly isn't it. This has to be a solution that works for the great majority of the teachers in the United States. If our kids were just taught, were just taught by the top 20% of teachers in the United States, those teachers alone could close the gap without anything else. They're that good. That's not a realistic answer. The question is, how can the majority of our teachers that are working today, 95%, 96% of the teachers that are in the school system, be a part of a system that closes the achievement gap? And part of it is removing what I refer to as the roadblock teachers, those very, very bottom teachers that are causing so much damage and drag that 4 above average teachers can't make up for it. And you can see how much of a burden. Again, it's trying to make it so that the system is healthy. And by the way, this is not a dramatic idea. This is just, like in any profession, just the very bottom. And the fears are, how do you evaluate that bottom, and we can get into all that stuff, that it'll be rampant. Everyone just fire everyone, and it'll be like craziness. And that's just not the case. Even in the schools that have the ability to do this, they hold on to every single teacher. They're so invested in the teachers. This is about the teachers. This is all about the teachers. In fact, you could argue that everything that you find in the data is all about helping the teachers. This is about how to help 96% of the teachers and make their lives successful and effective. That's what this is. It's all about the teachers.
All right, I want to make sure that we get Anna up here fairly soon, but I think we have one more. Feedback?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so I call it feedback, but that encompasses a bunch of things. And basically what you find is I was wrong about the artistic thing when I started. You remember the individual, that kumbaya thing I was telling you about at the beginning? The schools that dispense best practices, the schools that, when you hear about data, a lot of schools claim they've done data, where they say little Johnny's at 3rd grade reading level and he's in 4th grade, that kind of thing. That's not the kind of data we're talking about. I'm talking about, an intense amount of feedback of best practices, best curriculum. Where are you? What each student needs. But what you find it's fascinating is the teachers have to be trained, the principals have to be trained how to look at the data, and it's about there's a critical mass about how much you need to do this, and it's a fascinating thing because we're fighting this invisible war from what they're being told outside. There's a level that you have to get to. So you'll see like 11 times per year getting information about your class and how your feedback's coming is okay, it's pretty good, but 16 times per year and there's a tipping point. And suddenly you have dramatic changes in the students' achievement, things like that, which is really fascinating to me that there is an intensity level that has to match something, ambiguous, this thing we're talking about outside. So it's, feedback, constant feedback, and in observation and data of the classes and the best practices, like in some of the schools that are closing the gap, if Mrs. So-and-so teaches something in a second grade in a particular book and has incredible results because of the way she taught this thing, that goes up on a thing and everybody gets it and everyone's teaching that way, using that book and teaching that way. And so in that way, the best teachers, the top 20%, actually are the ones constructing the environment in each of these schools. So it is actually, it is in a little bit that the artists get to be artists.
All right. We'll go a little in-depth more into some of these, but now that we've got the 5 laid out, let's go ahead and bring Ana Ponce up. Ana is the CEO of Camino Nuevo Charter Academy in Los Angeles. Welcome to the stage.
Thanks
Thanks for coming up and joining
Hi.
us.
Hi.
Tell us just a little bit about your school. What makes it unique? Where are you?
Sure. Camino Nuevo is a network of schools that has a geographic focus in the downtown area. So we are invested in providing high quality educational options in the greater MacArthur Park communities just west of downtown LA. We have 6 charter schools, a preschool, 3,200 kids in our system, and we've been in existence for 14 years. And so we have the pre-K high school continuum, and a lot of the practices that are actually referenced in your book. What makes us unique, I think, is the fact that we really focus on the academic programs and have a lot of these tenets in place, but we also include a continuum of care where we bring in the sense of partnership, not just with the parents, but also with the community, so that there is shared ownership for the success of the kids. And it's not just limited in the school itself, but it's really part of a community success.
Well, I know that you've read the book.
Yes.
So give us some of your thoughts on
Sure.
these 5 tenets and the notion that we need to have all 5 of them going on at the same time or there will be failure. And also, I'd be curious from your perspective, do you think that that is realistic to do?
Sure. First, I want to thank Knight for putting something in the book that really kind of frames it, and that is that we're not looking at who is successful, but what is successful. And I really appreciated that concept because when we look at these practices, they are what makes a school successful. And it's important not to focus on that one school or that charter organization or that district, because then we get lost in the politics of it, but really to look at the five tenets that are laid out. And I think they are very comprehensive. A lot of what's in the book is happening at Camino Nuevo. So I was like, gosh, I guess we did do a lot of research to gather the best practices.
And you are cited in the back of the book, which is
Yes, we were
why-
listed as one of the schools.
Yourself and others that, you guys did it by trial by fire, and basically you invented the martial arts system. You figured out it yourself. And so when I was making that lecture, and the hope is that everyone doesn't have to be
Right.
you guys, that it can be laid out for others.
Absolutely. And just in terms of, is it a viable solution to schools or to systems? I think it is. I think it also needs to be individualized. and for the specific schools or organizations. And I also recall that there was a comment made about the different organizations that you visited, like they had things in common, but they had different identities. And I think that that's really key in looking at how you would bring these 5 practices into a school. And I would say that one of the other things that, in my experience, is that bringing the 5 practices to a school at the same time would probably be very challenging, particularly if you are working on changing mindsets. So really prioritizing which practice would be rolled out when, and how you could overlap them, how you can integrate them, and how you can bring folks along, particularly for established schools that have been around for more than 20 years, as you differentiate in your book as well, that it's different when you're starting with a clean slate as opposed to doing a turnaround situation.
But when you say that you need to differentiate, I mean, that's very hard to do within a school system. And I will also say we did invite LAUSD to participate tonight, and they did not respond. So we are really, oh, you're here. Well, welcome. You know, when you look outside of the charter system, and again, we are not going to debate charter schools here, but when you're looking at a public school system that really has to have a set of how they're going to implement ideas and reforms, you can't individualize it, can you?
Well, you have to, it has to fit with the school community. So you have to do a lot of the culture building work that needs to happen so that people are invested. You can't impose something on a community that typically fails, but if you could bring in the research, the ideas, and find innovative ways to get the investment, it's going to take time. It has to be a very intentional effort. And we also have to remember that, you know, in some systems, not everybody that's in a school wants to be there. And you're always going to be up against that. And also as a leader, figuring out how can you manage that situation to still further these changes if they're in a turnaround. But it does need to come from the community itself.
Did you have any issues with what Knight wrote in his book? Is there anything that didn't ring true for you in terms of your experience, given that I don't think you really spent any time in a classroom, did you? Or in classrooms
I taught for 1 day
Yeah.
for Teach for America.
Okay.
But
So,
visited-
Well, wait, was
visited-
it 1 day? Was it more like 1 hour?
It was an afternoon of stuff. But yeah, no, I'm not an expert at all. For sure, I mean, you know, for sure, we don't want to give ammunition to people to ignore 25 years of research.
Right.
So I don't want to even joke about that. I have no expertise in this field. So for all of them that are about to go at me, I know nothing about it. This was just me going, I spent the research time, the money, the foundation time to say, this is what all the experts in the world thought. It's all it is. If they said Red Sox are the way to teach, I would say, look, guess what? The research says Red Sox are the way to go.
Red Sox are definitely the way to go.
No, and I really appreciated that in the book, that it was presented that way, and that's the way that I read it, and I hope that that's the way the majority of the readers are reading the book, and that it really looks at the research that's been out there and how you went through and it kind of pulled all these promising practices from it. The one suggestion, I won't even say that it's a criticism, that I would make on the book would be to perhaps have it had included traditional schools in some of the examples of what was working, but I found that at the end, so it's kind of scattered through.
Yeah, and I wanted it too. You know, I think that you bring up a really interesting point that I want to be super clear on, because it'll seem like it's a pro, you know, charter. But I think that's what you're referring to, right? That is a pro charter book, but that's actually not. It's what it is that in the charter school system, it's allowing the opportunity to do extended day or extended, you know, into the summer or whatever it needs to do these things. It doesn't mean that that's the answer. It's just an opportunity. So, for example, in the reality of the data, you have incredibly high-achieving charter schools and incredibly, you know, poor-achieving charter schools, and the average is kind of, you know, pretty much where the traditional public schools are. And the traditional public schools, by contrast, would be more consistent, because of it. They're more consistent, which is it's not a pro charter or a tradition. That's not the conversation at all. It's which of any of these schools have had the opportunity, and some school systems now are adopting plans to be able to give opportunities to extend the day and do other things that they have found will go. My hope is it's the traditional schools will adopt these. That's the one. My hope and dream is for all that.
Well, I'm hoping with you.
Good.
One of the other questions that I have for you is, what role, if any, do you think parents play?
Yeah, I knew you were gonna ask that, by the way. So here's the thing. If I was gonna add a sixth one, I know what it is. I just didn't have the data to put it on here right now. One day it will be there, 3 years from now, 4 years from now, and that 100% is parent involvement. Okay, I just didn't have.
How can you be healthy without that?
Well, again, this was let's just be really careful here. So, it can be done, but it can be done. This will be the sixth tenet when it's proven. So, for example, there's like the little pieces that I did find and things that everything tells you that I just don't have enough to say that there's research there that says it yet. But like, for example, there was I forgot the name of it, it was Aber something from North Carolina. It was a preschool thing in 1972 to 1975, and they did a high quality preschool. But part of the preschool was they went into the home twice a week and they taught them how to do homework with the kids. Just 15 minutes of homework. That's all they did, twice a week. Once every 2 weeks. That's it. And those kids, as compared to the other early childhood programs that are really effective, as I told you, the early childhood programs have an inoculating effect for 3 years. This program had an effect for the entire run. These kids graduated at a higher rate from college, went to college at a higher rate than their peers, all because of this little factor that was added to the program, which was the parent involvement, because they had changed the home environment because of that. And so ultimately, you're going to find that when you can do that part of it, you're going to, expedite, catalyze everything, and it'll be so much easier when that happens. That's an opinion. I couldn't put it in the book because there wasn't enough research for me to do it, but I 100% believe in it.
So I asked you earlier if you were going to do a sequel, and it sounds like you're going to have to.
I'll let you guys write the sequel, man.
All right, we'll open it up to questions in just a minute. But Knight, before we do that, I wanted to ask you one question that is off a bit on a tangent, but I think one of the criticisms that I've seen in the writing about your effort here is people have said, hey, Hollywood, stay out of it.
Yeah.
Stick with what you know.
Yeah.
Let the parents figure this out.
Yep.
Let the experts, let the
Yep.
teachers figure it out. And you hear that a lot when directors, when actors try to start talking about issues.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on that? Does it bother you that they say that perhaps you shouldn't get into something like this because you are Hollywood?
Well, their skepticism is well-founded, and it should stay there. They should read the book with heavy skepticism and catch me if I'm ever saying anything of opinion, because my opinion doesn't matter in this field. I didn't spend my life as an educator. I'm just a parent and an interested Philadelphian that wanted to help Philadelphia, and all I wanted to know was what's healthy and what's not. That's all I wanted to know. And what I said is, I have a lot of financial resources and access to everyone in the country, and it took me 4.5 years to find this out. How does a low-income inner-city mom have a shot at finding out what's her best decisions for her kid, or what to fight for in the school or the school district and things like that? And I'm baffled why it isn't a best practices thing, and why it's so heated and opinionated and not an evidence-based field. But again, it's fine. This isn't about spotlight on me. This is supposed to be spotlight on the information. If they're debating the facts, I'm golden. We're in good shape.
Well, then let me follow up and just ask you, because we touched on this right
In
off the bat
Chicago?
and didn't really get to it. Why do you think that this is so hard to solve? Why is it so heated? Why is it so intractable?
I was on a panel in New York, and Education Nation, I think NBC does it, and there was another panelist with me, and she had written a book on this amazing school. I believe it was in Washington, D.C. Forgive me if I'm incorrect there. And when she was describing a book, she had read my book, she was amazed because she said she had written this book about this school back in the day when brilliant African Americans couldn't get jobs anywhere, and scientists and lawyers, they couldn't get those jobs, so they all went to this school, this one school, and they taught. And this was back in the day where it's for real. You walk outside and it was dangerous for their kids. And so they came up with a way of running the school and teaching those kids to overcome this. Those kids went on to become the first judge, the first this, the first everything in the United States came from this one school, African Americans. And she was astonished because she goes, this is what they were doing. And that's kind of the point. Nothing's changed. They used to yell and not let you on the bus and say you don't have to, and that was over. And now it's against the law to do those things, but nothing's changed. We're still doing the exact same message and acting in the same way. We're just whispering it. Does that make it any less pernicious or effective? I believe just by telling you about the summer slide, it's just as effective. They're doing what they want to, which is isolating this group. So, why are we okay with that? Why are we, it's the same old thing, dudes. If 1 million people in Paris died, the whole world would stop. 1 million people in Rwanda dies, we didn't even know about it. So it's the same thing. It's the same thing. Why does it, the fact that I'm not in this field has been a great thing. I was telling you this before we got up there, because I'm like, I don't have a horse in the game, guys. I'm not on this side or that side or any side. And interestingly, I think that I'm of Indian descent has made me, hard to figure out. Like, where's he coming from?
All right, with that, I think we'll get the microphones out here. So if you have a question, please raise your hand, tell us your name and where you're from. All right, why don't we start down here? This gentleman.
My name is Charles Ludd. I'm an attorney and a concerned citizen and also a product of public schools in South Central Los Angeles, and so I'm very interested in this topic. Just to go along the lines of what you all ended the conversation with, you talked about a sort of counterculture and a culture in school that speaks louder than the culture outside of school that deals with slavery. I just want to know what is the message that needs to be taught in schools? And secondly, which is important in this political climate, how do you do so without offending or navigating the politics that are present in a discussion about education today?
Just say the very last part one more time.
I think it's about, I think if you have this message, and this message is a cultural message that's opposite to something that's being taught, and that you taught outside of school that you say that pertains to slavery, how do you teach that message in school? It can be seen as indoctrination or politicization of students. How do you do so without?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, what you find is that the schools aren't addressing it like with the names, let's say, of what you just said, or what you and I were speculating about the causes of it. They're turning it into empowerment, statements of empowerment and worth and capabilities. So. All these schools, they don't say the same things. They don't say they're always positive and empowering and consistent. That's all that's the similarity. And what's really interesting is, there's some incredibly consistent schools. And so, one of the theories is that they're not going to a class. That's not what these kids are doing. They're going to a school, right? So you don't look at it as an individual class. So, for example, there was a school in Brooklyn that I went to, and all the kids did this when a kid did something right, when he or she said something great. It's called shining. That's how they applauded, and that was the whole class goes like that to the kid. And they had their own specific language that was just for all these kids, and every single class had the same language. So when little Susie graduated from second and had mastered that language, she didn't go from her class to my class and have to learn a new code, because they've been taught from the culture outside, you are worthless, you have no power in this, you can't master this system, this is not for you. So they inherently are coming in powerless, and this system is teaching them, the one in the school is teaching them, you're empowered. You have power. So we don't want the code to switch from her to my class. So they know that what this means and know how, if you choose to do your homework, you will get, this will happen, you will learn this. Those kind of moments, they can master each of our languages. So the more consistent through those classes, they've learning the opposite message. Wow, I have agency. I decide whether I get a good grade or bad grade. I decide whether I learn these things. That's how they're combating this pernicious quality of the things we were talking about, which has been taught to them, which is a kind of a learned helplessness from outside the classroom. A learned powerfulness is what they're teaching them bit by bit by bit, going, wow, you turned that 50 into a 65. Well, I'm still at the bottom of the class. You did that. And then they go to, oh, wow, you just got a 75. You just got a thing. You did that. And you're empowered. When we started, you didn't think you'd get a 75, did you? No. Well, then I bet you're going to get an 81. And then it goes like that, and it goes, and it goes, and it goes. They keep learning that they're powerful because they've been taught that they're not powerful.
Learned powerfulness. I like that. Did you have something?
I did. What we do at Camino Nuevo is we do a lot of work around developing the counter narrative that really is the empowering messages to the kids. And we do a lot of work with the adults at the school to make sure that we have a consistent alignment with what the counter narrative is going to be and how we find different ways of screaming, shouting that message so that the voice is louder than what the kids are hearing outside. And we also do a lot in kind of wrapping this up under the topic of social justice so that the kids start to get this awareness and they start coming up with the language and the vocabulary that perhaps would not be appropriate for a teacher to use in a classroom or for a school to commit to across the board. But we are giving the kids the tools, the information, the knowledge that they need, and we are working on the messages so that we are consistently overpowering what they're hearing outside of school and bringing their parents along with this counter narrative.
Okay. We have another question. Name and where you're from, please.
Joel Laguna from LA. I'm an LA USD teacher. One question I had actually was I was excited about the research and the data aspect of it, but one thing I've been noticing in the past few years is just the highly partisan nature of research and data that can tell you it can go many different ways with teachers, with unions, with certain practices. And one thing that you brought up was the classroom size. And you said 14 versus 31. Well, I had 59 kids in my class last year, right? And with that, the principal's just like, you're a great teacher. So in education, we see these best practices, these ideas, but a lot of times they just kind of go egregiously in one direction. How would you advise, the school systems from taking these ideas of small schools or, the classrooms and not just going 100% with it, burning straight into the ground? Yeah, you're absolutely right. There are parameters to everything. So you'd say, you don't have 115 kids in the classroom, right? We have, so for the brain dead people that you need to convince that there's a realistic number that we're talking about here, right? Obviously 60 kids is like a whole, that's like an auditorium, dude. You teach 60 kids? I did last year.
Incredible, dude.
It's like a college
amazing.
class.
Yeah, but
you're amazing.
This is something we must address, right? These best
absolutely.
practices that just
it should be all, in this bandwidth, right, of saying, from whatever it is, whatever the number, the data, we can figure it out, 38 kids or 40 kids to 20 kids or 14 kids is all within the realm of whatever we're calling acceptable or whatever. We could talk about that, but obviously at a certain point, like there's abuses that are egregious.
True. Well, I just want to say we just need to be always thinking about this.
Yes, we should always think about
how we write these things, but then how some people just take them. And
well, by the way, with the senators and things like that, what I'm talking to, legislation, this is exactly the kind of stuff that we talk about and saying, how could you abuse what we're putting in here?
Awesome.
How can
Thank
they
you.
abuse it?
I appreciate that.
Really wonderful job, dude. Seriously, bye.
But to his original question, how did you know that you were getting objective material to work with in the first place? Because as he said, it is so, they're just polar opposites on this thing.
Yeah, we look at meta as much as you can. I forgot the number of classroom size that we looked at, 158 studies, that kind of thing. So it'll look like a normal group will look like this, like classroom size. I'm making it up for this case, but it'll say, classroom size, there's, 17 case studies that say that there's, a dramatic improvement for reducing classroom size. 50 that say, it's a negative, and then 100 that say it's neutral.
So you got some
negligible.
from Heritage and some from Brookings, basically. is what-
Yeah. So, but you look at overall that it's not conclusive, or something like that. You're looking as broad as you can, and as many studies that meet the criteria that we want, peer-reviewed studies.
Okay. Another question out there? Back in the back?
Hi, my name is Christy. I'm curious about, you were talking about extended day, and when you were doing your research, were you able to parse out extended day versus out of school time versus after school programs? Did you get into that at all?
I'm sorry, that last part there.
I was curious.
Extended day versus what?
Versus out of school time or after school programs, and kind of drawing the fine line as to the benefits that extended day has versus after school programs?
It's a good question. They weren't delineating the after school programs at all in this research. This was only about extended day in the academic sense. So yeah, that's an interesting thing. Does that give some of the benefits? You know what I mean? Does it give some? That's a really interesting question. My guess it would be yes, but that would be I have to go look and make sure that research says that. Yeah, it was fascinating. One more thing I was thinking of. I don't know. Nobody's talked about this, but one of the things when we're thinking about it, not as our problem, right? That it's the country's problem. It's all our thing. We're telling these kids something, even though we're a part of the problem. Like when we don't think of it that way, we start to think of it, and I think this is where everything goes wrong. It's that thing like Chris Matthews said. Oh, it's their problem. The problem exists in the schools. Okay, so when we think like that, we're looking at the data incorrectly, and we're approaching it incorrectly. So I didn't find in the research accountability alone does anything. Now, that makes complete sense, because if it's not a problem of motivation, which the data says that is not the issue. It's not, let's motivate the schools to teach better. Let's motivate the teachers to teach better. Let's just change motivation. Let's just make it, let's make it accountable. That's it. That does nothing, the research says. They need to know how. The how. Everybody, the assumption that it's a motivational issue within the school system is just, I don't know where they're getting that from.
They get that from corporate America, is what they get it from.
You know what, you may be right, but it's fascinating because it's pointing the finger away from ourselves when really it is ourselves. If we took the responsibility, that it's us, and they're trying to solve this problem. The teachers and principals in these schools are trying to solve the problem we created. In fact, the teachers and principals in our schools are probably the only ones in this country not responsible for this.
All right, another question? Okay, back on the left.
So you kind of touched on what I was going to ask.
Can we get your name and where you're from?
My name is Ruth, and I'm from Pasadena. But it sounds like you're making it sound like it is a systemized agenda that certain people have, or when you say it's our problem that we created. Is it an agenda, or is it kind of just a lack of caring for?
Yeah, I think it's not an agenda. That seems to overt on our consciousness. This is something deep, It's that Paris versus Rwanda.
Is it innate racism? Is that what you think it is? Or?
Whatever the word is, it's a difference, right? It's a belief in the, this, my dad's generation, we know this, it was legal to discriminate, right? This same group, it just disappeared? That instinct? It just disappeared? I don't think so. It's a belief system that's there. It's what
you've overtly used the word racism.
Right, yeah, the apartheid. When we do comparisons to Finland, I'm like, what? Finland is smaller than Philadelphia. It wasn't built on this inequality. The only countries that have similar, these practices that work similarly, is countries like England, where there is some caste system stuff that's still there. It's Singapore, Finland, these countries that didn't have this. By the way, Hawaii, for example, doesn't have an education gap. They didn't have the same history that the rest of the states did, right? So why? Are they just special, just happy because they have a nice island over there? They don't have the same history. Neither does Finland, neither does Singapore. It's a fascinating problem that exists for just this group of kids that are being told something, and we need to tell them something else. It's a way of how do we deal with the things that learned helplessness that they've been taught.
And this is what you were talking about early on when you said that you decided to exclude the studies from other countries and just concentrate here in the U.S. because of the factors that you've just mentioned.
Yeah, it starts to get really confusing when you're doing best practices from, I'm sure some of them are valid, but you start to get into it confusing because their issue isn't our issue.
All right. A couple more questions, maybe? Yeah, in the back.
Hi, my name is Amy. I'm from Iridescent. We run a science education program in South LA. My question is this, there's a room full of us here, concerned citizens, educators. What would you like us to do? What's your message for us to go out and do with this research?
Great question.
Yeah, and it's just, everyone should be versed in what the data says. So, for example, there's some harsh things in there that I didn't realize. So I think the stat is, $19 billion is spent on higher education for teachers. Remember I referenced this in the beginning? And there is virtually zero correlation to student achievement and giving those degrees to those teachers. It seems unbelievably counterintuitive to me, but that's the truth. So if you're going to spend $19 billion, it should go to things we know for sure, like extended day or the summer program and things like that. I mean, when we're talking legislation, there's a different set of how to teach this group, this cohort, and that needs to be addressed. And so just knowing what the data is, like we talked about, effective teachers or whatever it is, what is your principal, what does your principal do? All those things, I guess the size of the school, everything you can be aware of and say, are you using best practices? The things that you're aware of from the data. So knowledge is the thing, because then the legislators all respond to that. If you're asking for smaller classroom size, they're going to keep giving you smaller classroom size as the things that they're doing, and that's just not what's going to close the gap. What's really interesting is I think it's been very encouraging. I couldn't even have written this book 5 years ago, by the way, because it wasn't, the data is coming from all these amazing people. And 5 years from now, there'll be that much more. I guess back in the day, you didn't believe that those kids could be taught. That was the first thing that needed to be, and then, those kids can be taught. Those kids can be taught, but it can only be taught in one classroom. One amazing teacher, Superman, Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan you need the Michael Jordan teacher, and that'll work, but that's not scalable. And then, it can be done in a whole grade. And then, it can be done in a whole school. It can be done in a whole school system. That's where we're right at that place now, where they're proving it can be done in a school system. And we'll be, farther on. The naysayers will just run out of breath, and hopefully their voices will get so hoarse and they'll go do something else.
All right, I think we can probably take one more. Again, over
Hi.
here on the left. Hi. What's your name and where are you from?
I'm Cloud Backus. I'm a Pasadena resident, but I was a teacher for Los Angeles County Office of Education. My question, well, actually, I have pages of questions, but
how about just one?
Fine. Thank you for talking about practitioners when you're talking about heart surgeons. The other practitioners are us. All of the teachers, we're the practitioners, we're the ones who have our boots on the ground. But my actual question is, how is this scalable, given the fact that in the history of education in the United States, we're not dealing like Finland with a countrywide system. We don't even have state systems because it breaks down from the national, which Mr. Duncan, to the states and then to the small districts. So how can this ramp up systemically?
Yeah, it is such a siloed system in this country that how do you implement wide reform?
From my little experience so far with regard to just getting the information out, so my experience has been an interesting one in that, there's like, for example, in Philadelphia, there's a school reform committee, and they make a lot of the decisions there, and there's a new head that's being chosen, and that person read the book and said they want to make it much more data-driven. Those kind of, in my particular city, I'm yelling a lot, so there's a lot of attention over in Philadelphia and things like that. Meanwhile, talking to, on this last week, I was in Washington with some congressmen as we're trying to draft, an education bills that more resemble the data, and every way I can come at it, any way we can come at it so that we're all it's like if you think about it like the health model again, when, my wife and I were first starting and we're looking for a place, getting a place with a gym in it was, occasionally there would be a gym in it, right? Because at that point, working out, when I was a little kid, someone who worked out was like weird. They were like Jack LaLanne. They were like, you were like, you're weird, dude. And it takes time for, things that are good knowledge to seep into practice. Now, I hope in this day and age, everything's happening much quicker, because of social media and all that stuff, and that's the great part of where we are. Perhaps the change can happen even faster, than a normal 2-generation, 3-generation change that it would take once you have the knowledge. It takes so long, but I'm optimistic that the change will happen, moment by moment, person by person. There's no like a do this and it will happen. It's everyone kind of coming to the conclusions that we should go smoking's bad for you.
Oh, yeah. Do you want to address?
Right. Yeah. Again,
For those of you who didn't hear, she just asked how that jives with Race to the Top.
Race to the Top. Yeah. Again, I'm not a big. I haven't seen the support for accountability alone does anything. You can't just hold someone accountable. It's going to cause, when you don't know how to do it, that doesn't help matters. I want to do it, so teach me how to win the game. I want to win the game. Don't just hold me responsible. I'm going to start to do things you don't want if you're going to hold me responsible. So again, that for me is not a component in terms of just the accountability alone of it. I don't see the support for that. At least I didn't find it in the research.
Okay.
Thank you.
I understand we have time for one more question. So over here, yes?
Oh, do I stand?
Sure.
Right.
And tell us your name and where you're
I'm
from.
David Cummings. I'm a social entrepreneur. I flew in from New York to attend this event. I could not attend
Welcome to
your event in New
Pasadena.
York. And by the way, my daughter is the Associate Director of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry at UPenn. I'm from Birmingham, Alabama. I'm 58 years old. I was there. I left Birmingham to go to BU, Boston University. So I have to say that you can't be what you can't see. The school that you couldn't think of was Dunbar High School in Washington, D.C.
That's it. Yes.
The other thing that we're skirting around is that being from Birmingham, seeing those children killed at that church, being attacked here in L.A., I brought 7 businesses to L.A. to help revitalize MacArthur Park. I hosted and funded an event for Rampart Village. I'll give you a package when we leave. I came because this city needs entrepreneurship. MacArthur Park used to be the fashion center of LA, but these kids don't know that. So we need to fuse history and philosophy to transform our communities. Education is an active activity. I was the tops in my class. I wasn't supposed to go to BU. Why? Because I'm from Birmingham? Why? Because I'm born out of wedlock? Those are the kinds of questions these children need answered. There is talent among those children in MacArthur Park. I flew all night to be here because of you guys.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for coming. Anna, did you want to comment on that?
Sir.
Yes, I definitely agree that we have a lot of talent, a lot of potential in MacArthur Park, and Camino Nuevo is demonstrating that kids that live in that community can actually graduate from high school and go to competitive colleges and graduate from college, even though they have never believe that would happen, because the culture in MacArthur Park is that if they drop out of high school, it's not that bad, because actually 50% of the kids drop out of high school. And so it's just, it's not your fault, it's just the way things are. And we are challenging that perspective, that actual belief that these kids can and will do well when they are provided with the kinds of schools that have these evidence-based practices in place, where we are holding one another accountable, where we see leadership, not only the principal leadership, but teacher leadership and parent leadership as really critical pieces of modeling for the kids, so that they see their parents, so that they need mentors. I grew up in Pico Union. I am a Camino Nuevo student, and I want them to see what they can grow up to be. And I have a personal, professional investment in that community, but a lot of the people that come to Camino Nuevo also believe in these kids. And if they don't, then that's not the right place for them. And I think that that's the culture piece that you address in your book, and one that is really important for all of these different communities, that they need to have their identity respected, and there has to be this core belief that these kids, that this community has potential and that they can achieve.
All right. Again, the book is called I Got Schooled. This has been a fantastic conversation.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Great
Thank you.
audience. Thank you for all the great questions. And our thanks to Ana Ponce and as well to M. Night Shyamalan. And have a great evening, everyone. Thanks so
Thank you,
much.
Tess.
Thank you.